Okay. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Legal Basics for Startups. Thank you all so much for joining us today. To start, I want to acknowledge that we are gathering on the traditional lands of Alaska Native peoples. Many of us, including myself, are joining this call from the lands of the Dena'ina people in South Central Alaska. Because we have folks joining from all over the state, I would like to acknowledge the traditional lands of many Native peoples and say that we, as the organizers of Startup Week, honor and respect the Indigenous stewardship of the lands of Alaska. Quick reminders that this event is part of the larger Alaska Startup Week 2021. Startup Week is a statewide effort featuring over 60 different workshops, panels, and events to promote entrepreneurship and foster connections between folks interested in startups. Jill and Siena from Dorsey have very generously offered their time and expertise today. They have a fantastic presentation prepared, and a recording of this session will be available later. I will be moderating questions in the chat, and there will be time for a Q&A after the presentation. Please give them a warm welcome.
Thank you, Tiana. We're really happy to be here for Alaska Startup Week. My name is Jill McLeod. I am a partner in our Anchorage office. In the Anchorage office head, I sit in our corporate group with the firm. I've been with the firm for a number of years. Dorsey is a mid-sized national law firm with offices all over the globe. I help businesses in a variety of different industries, including oil and gas, mining, telecommunications, real estate, all sorts of different businesses and different types of industries. I was born and raised in Alaska and have lived here for more than half of my life. I'm here with Siena Caruso. She's an associate in our Anchorage office as well. She is in Dorsey's commercial litigation group in our Anchorage office, and she also works with a wide variety of companies in a range of industries here in Alaska. She was born in California and is a more recent transplant to Alaska, moving here in 2015. And after studying in California at UC Berkeley, and came to us after clerking for the Superior Court in Anchorage and the Alaska Supreme Court in Fairbanks. So we are here today to give you a presentation on the legal basics for starting a business. And I just want to give you a little bit of a disclaimer. We aren't in a position to actually provide legal advice to you today. And so this presentation contains general information that is not applicable to specific circumstances, and we're not acting as legal counsel today and would have to be retained by a separate legal written agreement that was signed by us in order to be providing legal advice. So with that, we're going to get started, and Siena is going to go over the agenda for today.
Thank you so much, Jill, for getting us started today. And like Jill, I'm really excited and honored to be able to share our expertise and our time with you today to help all of you start or grow your businesses. So we hope that today you can at least get an overview of sort of the potential legal landscape out there and the issues that you'll want to be considering as you start and grow your businesses. So our agenda today is going to begin with a new business checklist. So sort of key items that you want to be considering when starting your business. Then we'll dive into some more specific topics, including licensing, the various business entity types that you may want to consider starting your business as or converting your current business into, the responsibilities and liabilities for boards of directors, insurance and financing considerations, and the importance of understanding the difference between employees and independent contractors. And sort of once we go through those various issues, then we'll go into more of a contracts 101 and just walk through the basic elements of a contract and help you understand and ensure that the contracts that you're entering into accurately reflect what you what you want to have in that contract, and that you understand exactly what you're signing. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Jill, to get us started on the new business checklist.
Okay, so when you're starting a business, we thought it would be helpful just for you to have a simple checklist of the various items that you'll want to make decisions on as you're reflecting on your specific business and the structure that you want to establish for your business. So here's a quick checklist for new businesses. So you'll want to pick an entity type, and we're going to, in the next several slides, discuss the different types of entities that you can consider when starting a business. You'll want to, as part of that process, if you're going to establish a new business and or choose a business name, you'll have to see if it's available and reserve that name and register it with the state of Alaska. You're also going to need to get some specific licenses, and we're going to run through some of the specific types of licenses that you'll want to get and consider as part of your business. Before you establish the business, you're going to need to choose the name, as we said, and then you're also going to have a registered agent and choose name your directors and officers for that business when you incorporate the business. You will incorporate the business entity with the state of Alaska or the other state in which you're going to do business, and that will require you to file certain documents, and you will have to continue to file reports on a regular basis with the state of Alaska or other states. In addition, you'll need to get an employer identification number. It's essentially the tax ID for the business, and what's known as a NAICS Code. We'll go into those in a little more detail later. Then you'll want to, once you've established the business and determined the name of the business, you'll need to apply for the specific business licenses that you will need with the state of Alaska and the municipality of Anchorage or other cities that you're doing business in. You'll want to obtain any state or federal permits. And I'm just going to highlight that we're not going to be going over specific permitting questions today. There's just too much information to go through. You'll want to consider obtaining insurance for your business. And then you may also need to obtain financing for your particular entity. If you're needing an additional capital investment beyond what you are personally contributing to the business. And I understand that you would need to talk to the Alaska Small Business Development Center about that. We're not going to be providing guidance on financing today, but it's something you should consider when you're establishing the business, whether you'll need it or not. And there are other opportunities for getting more information on that. And I also want to highlight that in our presentation slides, we have some additional resources that will be helpful to you, and you'll be provided a copy of this presentation, and you'll have access to all the different links for those resources. When we get to that slide, we'll highlight the different websites and other organizations you can go to for additional help as you establish your business.
Great, thanks, Jill. So diving into just the first step of this new business checklist is going to be choosing your business entity type. So there's a variety of different business entity types, and which one works best for your business really depends on what your business is and what your business is, how many employees you want to have, the type of industry that you're in, the tax ramifications for each of the business entity types. So as you can see on the screen, the four main types of common business entities are a sole proprietorship, that's just one individual, partnerships, which can be more than one person, partners in a business, limited liability company, and then various types of corporations. And so we will go into further detail of sort of the pros and cons, or at least the different aspects and elements of each of these entities, so you can think more about which one would be a good fit for your business. But it's important to consult with your accountant and ideally with your legal counsel to decide which business entity is really going to fit best for your business. And it's very important once you do choose whichever business entity type you're going to select for your business, that you follow through with the corporate formalities of that business type, including filing biannual reports with the state and adhering to whatever requirements are necessary for that business type.
Okay, one of the key factors in determining the type of entity that you would like to set up and whether or not you want to set up a separate business entity, a separate legal entity, is this concept of limited liability. If you do not set up a separate legal entity, you are operating your business as a sole proprietor. And you may be operating that business in your own name or in a doing business as name. Then that would be in contrast to setting up a separate legal entity. If you are operating your business as a sole proprietorship, you are personally on the hook for all the business debts and liabilities. And so you have no personal liability protection. In contrast to this, a business structure that protects owners from personal liability for debts of the company is a limited liability corporation or corporation. So you're setting up a separate legal entity to limit your liability. And LLCs and corporations are both legal entity types that protect you personally from being responsible for the debts and liabilities of the company. Limited liability companies also don't pay taxes on the profits directly. The limited liability company structure allows the profits of the company to be passed through directly to the owners of the company, and for the owners to be taxed as the profits of the company to be taxed as personal income. So the profits of the LLC are then reported on to the individual members of the company. So this is a key decision factor when you're determining whether or not to operate as a sole proprietorship or set up a separate legal entity. So you have to consider your own personal situation. And if you have a lot of personal assets that you would like to protect and you have a significant amount of wealth, it may be best to consider establishing a separate legal entity to protect those assets from the creditors of the business to reaching those assets. Now, when you set up a separate entity, you actually have to continue to follow certain corporate formalities in order to ensure the limited liability protection. And that means you need to separate your personal assets from the business assets. And you do not want to commingle personal assets and business assets, even if you're the sole member of that corporate entity. So that means you want to have a company bank account. You want to not pay for business expenses out of your personal banking account. You want to fund your business and ensure that the business itself, the separate legal entity, has the funds to operate as business. You want to actually contract in the name of that business and not your personal name. So it's very important in order to continue to benefit from the limited liability protection that you follow the corporate formalities of the business and operate your business completely separate from your personal assets, so that you can ensure that you can benefit from the protections of the legal entity structure. Sienna, your turn.
Thanks, Jill. And you'll notice that this is going to be a common theme of our presentation today, is the importance of documenting everything that you do in your business, and ensuring that the documentation that you have accurately reflects how the business is actually operating. Because one of the most challenging factors that I see, particularly as a litigator, is having a client come and say, we're in a dispute with somebody about something, and you go back and you look at the written document and it's really unclear, or what's written down is perhaps a form of a similar type of agreement that they thought made sense, perhaps that they got off the internet or from a friend or from something, and then but that document doesn't really align with what's happening in the business or in the contractual relationship. And so then it's really challenging, because it becomes well, this is what the document says, this is maybe what the parties perhaps understood or intended, but it's different, or folks remember it in different ways. And so you'll just see throughout the presentation, there's a heavy emphasis on documenting. And I myself, in my personal experiences, can say that sometimes it feels like I don't understand why I have to write this down. Clearly we understand what's happening here, but it's always helpful. It's always helpful to have things in writing, and ideally writings that are as accurate as possible.
Yeah, so, and on that front, Sienna, that's a good reminder. It's very important to keep those records, right, and have good, accurate financial records and corporate governance records. You may be audited by the IRS, and so you'll want to make sure you have the financial records to support your tax returns. Your corporate governance records, you want to be able to keep a record of the decisions that the entity made, and you'll want to have an operating agreement if you are doing business with another business owner and you are both members of that LLC. So it's extremely important to keep records of the business entity structure, and even with respect to a sole proprietorship, to keep records, financial records of what you are doing and why you're doing it.
Absolutely. And I mean, even just something recently that came up, I can think of a contract dispute in a business filed a lawsuit, and the defense from the person who was getting sued was that the business hadn't filed their biennial report, and so they actually were statutorily prohibited from filing a lawsuit because they were, bad corporate citizens, and they weren't allowed to take advantage of the legal system. So it arises in so many different ways. So if you take nothing else from this presentation, please document everything. please speak to your accountant, please speak to an attorney, early and often. If you have the opportunity to just to make sure everything can be as documented as possible. But turning back to the presentation, so in addition to thinking about liability issues when choosing your business entity structure, you also want to think about how your company is going to be managed and structured. What makes sense for your business? So, the first part of that in our sort of theme of making sure that things are clear is making sure that it's clear who owns the business, who owns it, what percentage do they own, what's the relationship between perhaps the person who had the initial idea and the person who has the funding, and making sure that that is very clear from the get-go. Along with thinking about ownership structures, it's also important to think long-term. So would it make sense to have stock options be an incentive for bringing new folks or folks who have talent that you want to utilize and perhaps have them have equity in the company in exchange for using their expertise, particularly in the beginning of starting a business. And then consider vesting structures to help ensure that those initial folks who are part of the company will continue to stay. In addition to ownership, management is really important. And so understanding who's doing what and who's responsible for what in a business is, it helps the business run more efficiently, but also in terms of liability aspects, there can be different levels of liability depending on what your role is in the company. But more importantly, you want to make sure that people are doing the jobs that they're either getting paid for or that they're getting equity for. And so having an employee agreement that sets out what their jobs and duties are, what their title is going to be, if it's going to be for a specific amount of time, if there is going to be vesting options, it's ideal to have that in writing, if nothing else, so that's just clear to the person who's performing that task and to the other people in the company, what jobs are going to be performed by that individual. And then lastly, as Jill touched upon, taxes and fees. So this is really something to think about with your accountant about what makes sense for you personally and what makes sense for your company and how you want to structure the business. And while a lot of folks incorporate in Delaware, and that can make sense for a variety of reasons, lots of entities also incorporate here, and that can make sense too, for reasons like lower fees and other reasons that might make sense for your business. So while a lot of folks do go to Delaware and that can make sense, I think about perhaps incorporating here too. So do you want to do this chart, Jill?
Sure. So the next two slides essentially are basically a chart that briefly summarizes the different types of business entities and the key elements of each of those business structures. And I think for the purposes today, we've focused on sole proprietorship and then limited liability company and the different types of corporations. General partnerships and limited partnerships are a little less common. They're not unheard of course. Neither a general partnership or limited partnership will provide the business owners with limited liability protection. So similar to establishing your business entity as a sole proprietor, general partnerships and limited partnerships still have unlimited liability. So that's a consideration if you're getting into a general partnership with another individual. The chart goes through the type of management structure you might see within each one of those types of entities, and focusing on the sole proprietor. Of course, there you have a sole owner, and that sole owner manages a business. In a limited liability company, generally there's a choice. You can choose a member managed structure where all the members of the entity manage the business together, or you can identify a manager or a board of managers to operate the business on a day-to-day basis. As we discuss liability in a sole proprietorship, there is unlimited personal liability with respect to the individual that owns the business. In a limited liability structure, we have limited liability protection, and the members are shielded from from personal liability, provided they comply with the corporate formalities. With respect to formalities and public disclosures, we've got the items there. The sole proprietorship, there's generally not a disclosure requirement. However, you are going to still obtain business licenses, and those will be publicly available online once you filed for your business licenses. A limited liability companies and corporations are required to make filings with the Secretary of State to organize or incorporate the business, and make regular filings to ensure the corporation or the limited liability company remain in good standing. Taxation with respect to a sole proprietorship, that is taxed at the individual level. As similarly, though, a limited liability company, you essentially elect to be taxed at the individual level, and there's pass-through tax considerations with respect to a limited liability company. When we get to the next page, we'll go over the different tax implications for a corporation. So these are just high-level business points that you should consider as you're determining how you want to establish your business. With respect to the corporations, you'll see on the next slide that there are a couple of different types of corporations that you would consider as a small business owner. Generally, small business owners are going to be choose the S Corp election, and that allows them to enjoy tax pass-through tax liability and responsibility. Generally, C Corps are what you think of as a publicly traded company, where you have many different shareholders who are purchasing stock in the corporation, and you may even have a corporate entity that actually owns all the shares of the corporation, whereas under an S corporation structure, only individual persons can own stock in an S corporation. So if you're going to have a corporate entity that is going to own the corporate entity doing business in Alaska, you wouldn't be allowed to establish an S corporation. So if you're looking at having a parent company structure or something within your own business, you may have to think about establishing taking a different type of corporate structure, S Corp versus C Corp election. And of course, all of these corporations enjoy limited liability. There are many corporate filing requirements with respect to corporations. And in that sense, sometimes business owners decide to form a limited liability company, an LLC, because there are some fewer formalities with respect to LLCs in terms of meeting requirements, et cetera. there are some formalities with corporations holding annual shareholder meetings, appointing officers and directors, and sometimes those formalities just make it a little bit overwhelming for a small business owner, and they would opt to choose a limited liability company structure. And then with respect to corporations, with C corporations, there is a double taxation issue because the corporation itself will have to pay corporate taxes depending on where the corporation has been incorporated. And the general comments here with corporations, generally it's easy to expand your investor group with corporations as you want to increase your investors in the business. You can sell stock in the corporation. So it's generally pretty easy to expand your business if you have the corporate structure in place. Limited liability company, you're going to have an operating agreement that you're going to need to enter into, and you're going to have to ensure that you follow the terms of the agreement in terms of bringing in new investors and selling a membership interest in that limited liability company. And that'll come into play if you have more than one member. That's very, very high level overview of the business entity types and the key elements of each of those structures. And you can refer back to this chart as you're moving forward, making your own decisions.
Thanks, Jill. So turning next to potentially something that you'll need to do with regard to corporate formalities with the IRS, if you have employees, is to get an employee ID number. So if you set up one of these business entities, so it won't apply to sole proprietorships or general partnerships if you don't have employees. But for any of the other business entity structures, if you have employees, you're going to need to apply for an employee ID number through the IRS for taxes, for payroll, and for loans.
And it's really easy to do. It's an online, actually, I want to note that there's actually a typo in that slide. It should be employer ID number. Sorry about that.
Oh.
And it's actually very easy to make your application for your EIN online, and it happens instantaneously. It's an online process, and you'll get your number immediately, and then you'll be able to use that number for your employees, payroll. And if you are wanting to open a bank account, which you will need to do, you'll need that EIN number to open the bank account with the bank. So it's a pretty quick and easy process.
Thanks. So in addition to getting employer ID number, you'll also need to look up what your NAICS code is. So this is a code that basically tells both federal and state governments what type of a business you're operating. And you can actually choose, I believe at least for the state of Alaska, you could choose several NAICS codes, depending on what your business is and sort of where and in what industries it's operating under. It's a 6-digit code required for your business license and is necessary for you to form either your corporation or LLC. So we have the link here where you can research what that code is, and there's also more information about this on this the State of Alaska website, which in addition walks you sort of through how to select the code that fits best for your business.
Yeah, here's actually, this is Sienna, this is our one of the links. This is going to be really important for you as you determine what business licenses you will need to obtain in order to go forward with your business. And of course, you will need a state of Alaska business license, and you can apply for this online by going to the links we've provided here. You click on the new Alaska business license link, and you'll need to have your credit card ready, and you will complete all the information there, and you will need your NAICS code and your business entity name, and if you've established an LLC, some of the information, same information that you've provided to incorporate or organize your business entity, you'll need for this form as well. So you'll want to go here to obtain your business license, and again, that is an instant license, and you'll be able to obtain it immediately.
So in addition to state licenses, you also may need to get municipal licenses depending on where geographically your business is operating. And then depending on what your business is, there can be a number of permits and other issues that you'll have to grapple with on the municipal level, depending on what industry your business is in. And so really important to think through where physically your business is operating, and that's both in Alaska and then also in any other state that you may be operating in. So just be aware. I'm sure for those of you who are involved in some of the industries that are listed on the slide, you are aware of sort of the heightened permitting requirements that you may face depending on what city you're operating in, but we just wanted to flag it for everybody here.
Yeah, and that slide really is limited to, we focused on the municipality of Anchorage licenses here. So you'll want to go to, the website for the different cities within which you are operating. So you may need multiple licenses in the different cities. The other thing to point out here is that we haven't gone into the different types of professional licenses that may be required for your business. For example, if you are an engineer, or you are an esthetician, or you are working in some sort of healthcare industry, you may need other professional licenses in order to obtain your municipality licenses or state licenses. So you need to look at this at the business license level, the municipal license level, and then the professional license level. And then on top of that, you may need additional federal permits to do the work that you are doing. So we can't get into all of that here, but just want to highlight all of those different elements for you.
So now that we've gone through permitting and licensing, then the next fun topic is discussing business insurance. And so with this,
You want me to go through this one?
Yeah, we'll
Tiana?
briefly, Jill will go through briefly each of the different types of insurance, but really we just highly recommend that you speak with your broker or with your trade association to understand the type of business insurance that would be best for your business.
Yeah, the biggest point is that if you do not have business insurance, it may be very difficult to contract with other businesses or individuals. They may require you to have business insurance, and they won't enter into an agreement with you for you to provide services to them or whatnot. So it could be difficult for you to do businesses with others. The other, or to obtain a lease, for example, you'll likely have to have business insurance. The other thing is, if you don't have business insurance, then the legal entity, the LLC or the corporation, or you as a sole proprietor will be paying for any of the losses associated with the business out of your own pocket, right? So that could get expensive. You know, if somebody trips and falls on your premises and you don't have business insurance and they sue you, you could be facing a very expensive lawsuit and potential damages, you know, tens of thousands of dollars. And that could make or break a business. So we highly recommend that you obtain business insurance, and it may be very difficult to operate without it. These, what we have here is a list of the most common types of business insurance that you would consider. And as Sienna said, we want you to go talk to your qualified insurance broker about what you will need. The most common type of insurance that you will need for almost any type of business operation is commercial general insurance policy, commercial general liability insurance policy. And that will cover things like personal injury on your property or as part of your services you provide, any property damage. It will assist you in the event of certain types of other damages. So that is going to be essentially a requirement to operate with others. And then and as part of that, you may want to consider what's called umbrella insurance. And that is insurance in excess of the specific types of policies. So if you have commercial general insurance, liability insurance, and you get an umbrella policy, this will basically cover losses that aren't covered by the commercial general liability insurance or some of these other types of insurance. So it's recommended to consider whether or not an umbrella insurance policy is something that you want to look at. Commercial property insurance, very important. Oftentimes, as part of a lease, you may have to also insure the property you're renting. So that's important. Directors and officers insurance policy is helpful in the event that you are concerned that perhaps there has been a mistake made by the managers or directors and officers of the business. Cybersecurity is something to consider if you're in a business where you're going to be handling a lot of personal information or storing a lot of confidential information. And then, of course, workers' compensation insurance is something that will be required if you have employees working for you. So that's just a high level summary of the types of insurances that you should consider.
And that's a great segue into the next slide, which is a brief discussion on independent contractors. So the last note that Jill had on her last slide was with regard to workers' comp insurance. So if you have employees, that's something you're going to need to have. Alternatively, depending on what tasks the individual or individuals are doing, they may qualify to be considered independent contractors. And differences between employees and independent contractors mainly are that an independent contractor is responsible for his or her own liability, for any sort of workers' compensation, insurance, taxes, and benefits. So obviously, as an employer, there can be a lot of benefits to having somebody be classified as an independent contractor as opposed to an employee. However, you need to be exceptionally careful and thoughtful about whether the duties and tasks that that person is performing really qualify them to be categorized as an independent contractor. The IRS is very watchful of misclassifications, and this can result in huge fines to the employer and then liability for back taxes. So when thinking about whether an individual should be classified as an independent contractor, you want to think about keep these following things in mind. So is that person being hired to perform a specific job, or not? Is it is the independent contractor, think of the length of time that the independent contractor is going to be working for you, and whether so in addition to time and the task, independent contractors are not permanent, and they cannot be hired at an at-will basis. In addition to the job and the length of time and the type of tasks that they're going to be performing, a critical aspect in the analysis of whether that person should be classified as an independent contractor is the amount of supervision or control that the employer has over the work that the independent contractor is doing. So independent contractors generally have their own tools to do whatever job they're going to be performing, and they do it independently without sort of great oversight or instruction from the employer. So independent contractors can't be supervised or controlled in the same way that an employee can. Generally, they're given an amount of time for when a project or task needs to be completed, but they're not required to be somewhere, say, from 9 to 5 in the same way that an employee is. Similarly, independent contractors have the autonomy to perform tasks when, where, and how the independent contractor deems it makes sense for them. So same thing, not being necessarily seated in an office from 9 to 5 in the same way that an employee would be. Independent contractors have the ability to hire out other assistants or other individuals to help them complete whatever task they've contracted to perform. And so when you're hiring an independent contractor, you're hiring them to complete a job. You're not hiring them to work, a certain set of hours. And most importantly, they're not being hired to be part of the day-to-day operation of the business. They're being hired to perform a specific job or general task for a discrete period of time. And once that job or task is completed, then your working relationship with them is over. So just bottom line, be really careful and thoughtful when you're thinking about whether the person that you're hiring qualifies as an independent contractor, just because you can be on the hook for fines and back taxes if that individual has been misclassified.
Okay, I think this slide is just to give you some resources in the event that you are going to be looking for financing for your new business. So again, we encourage you to go get further information. about startup financing from the Small Business Development Center. And you can take a look at some of the other websites, the U.S. Small Business Administration website, the Department of Commerce website, and those will allow you to get some additional information of the types of financing that may be available for you to tap into as you're looking for additional resources for funding your small business.
Great. And so with that, we've sort of finished the first segment of our presentation here today, talking through the different elements of the new business checklist. And so we wanted to just take a pause. We know it's a lot of information on a lot of different topics, and just wanted to see if anybody had any questions that they'd like to raise at this point before we dive into the second half of our presentation, sort of walking through contracts.
Yeah, thank you guys so much. If there are any questions, please put them in the chat. But otherwise, I don't know if people want to like maybe go around and briefly introduce themselves and their business and kind of what industries they're interested in. We don't have time to hear from everyone, unfortunately, but if a couple of people want to go, that'd be really great. Gretchen said in the chat, this has been so fantastic and I'm definitely going to rewatch it. Oh, she has to leave for another event, but she's very grateful that you two put this together and are sharing your expertise.
That's kind.
Fantastic. Yeah, I think that, you know, there's also time for questions at the end. So if there's anything that you want to ask about, please just have it in the back of your mind. Okay, great. Yeah, so Marissa from Seward said there are 6 other attendees at the viewing party, some business owners and some in the dreaming stage. That's amazing.
Thanks, Marissa. Okay, so at this point, we'll continue on and walk through Contracts 101. And if you do have any questions or think of anything, please feel free to put it into the chat and we'll be sure to answer your question. So the sort of main big question here, what is a contract? So a contract is a written or it can be oral, a spoken agreement that is intended to be enforceable by law. A contract obligates a party to perform or not perform a certain task or action. And if that party violates the agreement, either by not performing or doing it incorrectly, the terms of that agreement, the injured party has access to legal remedies to rectify that breach of contract. In essence, gives them the opportunity either to go to court, to go to arbitration, to mediate, or seek out other remedies that might be written into the contract itself to remedy the breach that one party has done to another.
Okay, so in order to have a valid contract, we lawyers like to say you have to have offer, acceptance, consideration, and capacity. And the other thing you have to think about is legality or validity, whether the actual acts that you are wanting to agree to and perform are legal. So we can't have illegal activity. So just in terms of what each of these elements are. So an offer is essentially one party makes an offer to perform a service, sell a product, or trade, or conduct some other kind of business venture. And you, for a valid offer, you would look at having an accepting party. So a party you're going to make the offer to, and the subject of the offer. What are you going to do? What service are you going to perform? What are you going to sell, for example? And then you'd want to also, as part of that offer, set out any quantity or price for the type of service. And then with respect to acceptance, so acceptance would be the promise or act of the buyer or the person accepting the service to indicate their willingness to actually be bound by the terms and conditions that you stipulated in your offer. So that's acceptance. And then if somebody conditionally accepts that or includes additional terms, that would be considered a counteroffer. And a counteroffer is essentially a rejection of the original offer, and it starts the contract formation process all over again. It becomes sort of a new offer. And acceptance generally has to be given in a manner that is either outlined in the offer by a certain date, in writing, etc., or by reasonable means. It has to be clear that the person accepting the offer is actually accepting. And generally it's it can be in writing or orally, but depending on the offer, if the offer says it must be in writing, then you'll need to comply with the terms of the offer. Consideration, generally any promise or contract has to be exchanged for adequate consideration, and you have to exchange something of value. But consideration can be money, it can be a promise to perform an act, it can be a promise to refrain from acting, and it can be some other item of value. And then finally, capacity. Each party must assume that the other party involved in the contract has the legal right and the ability to fulfill their end of the contract. And they must be able to fully comprehend the terms of the contract. So if, for example, someone's intoxicated, with some exceptions, or a minor, they may lack capacity to actually contract. Because they may not fully understand the obligations that they're undertaking. So it's important to have capacity when you're entering into a contract. And as I mentioned before, we can't contract for something illegal. Certain contracts, I just want to highlight that certain contracts have to be in writing. And so it's important to understand what's known as the statute of frauds. And under the Alaska state law, there's a statute of frauds that lists all the contracts that have to be in writing. And for example, if you transfer an interest of land, you sell your house, that contract has to be in writing. If you lease a commercial property for longer than a year, that contract has to be in writing. So certain contracts must be in writing. So I just highlight that for you. Next slide.
And on the flip side, though, and this is something that we'll get into in a few slides, you also want to be careful because while some contracts have to be in writing, contracts sometimes, only those contracts identified in the statute of frauds have to be in writing. So if you enter into an oral agreement with someone, depending on what the terms are of that agreement, that can be enforceable, even if it's not written down. So just be mindful and be careful, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in a few slides. So there are, and some of you may have heard, the term boilerplate language. There's boilerplate provisions in this agreement. The idea being that there's certain provisions in an agreement, in a contract, that are very common and come around. Just because it's boilerplate doesn't mean that you shouldn't read it. And your business and actually conforms to what your understanding of the agreement is. So while many of these terms will be in any contract that you enter into, it's really important to make sure that they all accurately reflect exactly whatever it is you are agreeing to contract to. So starting from the very beginning, so the preamble and recitals that identifies who the parties are to the agreement. Very important that the parties' names are correctly identified. There can be issues where if somebody uses an acronym or a DBA, and you think that that's actually an LLC or something, it can create a lot of confusion, and you want to make sure you understand who you are contracting with and that that's accurately written down in the contract. Recitals basically sort of provide a context of why the parties are entering into an agreement. And so they're not legally binding, but they sort of explain how the parties got to where they were. And so it's particularly helpful for contracts that last over a long period of time, so that those who come into the agreement later down the line sort of understand why the contract was entered into in the first place. And particularly if the contract ends up getting assigned to a new party, so a new party takes over that contract, they have a little bit of context to understand, why the contract was entered into in the first place. So it's not legally binding, but it just sort of sets the scene for why the contract was created and sort of what the general intent was behind the parties when they decided to enter into it. A section that you will often see in contracts is definitions. And so this is really important. If there are specialized words used in your industry, we highly recommend that you have that definition in the contract itself, because as things evolve, or depending on if you are contracting with somebody who is in a geographically different place or works in a slightly different industry, their understanding of what those terms might mean could be very different. And so again, sort of going to our theme of clarity, making sure that things are written down, you just really want to make sure that everybody is on the same page about, not just the terms of the agreement, but even just the words that are written in the agreement itself. So the next is the commercial provisions. So this includes everything from, if it's commercial lease, how long is the lease going to be? What's going to be the cost for renting the space? Sort of like the meat of that agreement. So same thing, if you're doing, say a licensing agreement. So again, it's going to be the length of the agreement, what exactly is being licensed, any other intellectual property concerns relating confidentiality or different issues that might be specific to the contract itself. That's sort of going to be often what people think of is sort of makes up the meat of the contract. So then what you will often see next is representations and warranties. So these are statements of fact and assurances that are made by each of the parties, basically saying that there are actions that they have done in the past. So basically it's a backward look at promises and actions that the parties said that they have taken before coming into the contract. So this includes things such as, I represent and warrant to the other party that my company is in good standing. I have paid my taxes, I have insurance, I've complied with applicable laws. I actually own the property I say I'm selling or leasing, or I actually have, right to the, trademark or patent rights, to whatever the product is that I'm selling. And I have authority to actually perform this transaction, to enter into the agreement. So that's sort of looking backwards. And then contracts also have promises that look forward. So these are things that parties promise to do either between the time that the contract is signed and that the contract has actually closed, that the deal has closed, or things that the company will continue to do going forward. So basically it's obligations that the parties will continue to do, like to operate in the ordinary course of business until the deal is closed. Next, we have closing conditions. So these are certain things that the parties agree have to happen in order for the deal to close. So failure for either party to follow through on these conditions allow the other side to walk away from the deal. The last bullet point on the left side of the slide is indemnification. So this is really important and a serious one to consider in probably all of the contracts that you enter into, but this is a post-closing remedy for losses incurred as a result from the breach of the contract. And that includes breach of the contract terms, the sort of commercial provisions, warranties, covenants, or any other part of the agreement. So usually these have a time limit, but it allows you to come back as one of the parties and say, hey, you promised that you were going to have paid your taxes, and now the deal has closed and I found out that you didn't. You need to fix that, and so you need to indemnify me for any potential liability that I'm going to have because of something that you promised you would do and then you failed to do. Usually there's time limits in indemnification provisions, so it's I don't know, maybe 3 years, 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years after the deal has closed. So as you're coming up to that indemnification deadline, you'll really want to sit down, look at the contract, and make sure that the other party has in fact done everything that they said they would do with that agreement. Otherwise, you'll miss your chance to ask them to basically perform what they said they promised to perform. As you'll see on the right side of the screen, there is lots of other elements of the contract that are also incredibly important. And I think in particular, the termination clause. So it's really important, I think like with divorce, sometimes people don't think about, oh, what's going to happen if, we enter into the service agreement and, both sides, it's going to be great. Everybody's going to make a lot of money. You don't think about what happens, if somebody decides they want to get out of the contract for whatever reason. And so you want to think about that on the front end and make sure that you have an out, and that the out that you're providing for the other party is something that you're comfortable with. As a litigator, I will also say you want to look at the governing law and venue provisions. You want to make sure that it's going to be in a place that's convenient for you And if there's any, specialization about your industry or special importance about, how your business is run or where it's run, you'll want to have the laws of that state and think about whether arbitration is something that makes sense for you or whether you want it to be in state court. If, something were to happen and there were to be a dispute over the contract. Lastly, I'll just touch on assignment. So this is giving the authority for one or both of the parties to have someone else take over their responsibilities for completing the contract. So it just depends whether you want that option or you want both. It doesn't have to be mutual. It can be just one party has authority to assign the contract. It depends on what your business is and whether you want someone else potentially to have the opportunity to be part of that agreement, or whether you want to limit it just to the parties who have contracted to the original agreement.
And just before I go into the types of contracts, I just want to say, a lot of people, as Siena kind of alluded to in the beginning of this slide, that, oh, these are boilerplate provisions, and oh, the miscellaneous section of the contract, which contains quite a lot of meat, I can just breeze through that, and oh, that's standard. Well, you need to carefully consider every provision in a contract and determine what your needs are. It may be that you don't want the other party to be able to terminate the agreement, and if they terminate, they need to pay a penalty. So you may want to share the expenses, or you may want to have the other party pay the expenses. So all of these things, there can be hidden items in there that if you just breeze over those sections, you may miss, and you may be signing up for something that you really didn't consider. So I would just impress upon you to make sure that you read every contract carefully, to ensure that you understand each and every provision and that you are satisfied that the contract sets out what the parties have agreed to, and that it contains the terms that you want it to contain. And because contracts are negotiable, and you can go back, even though the other party may say, oh, this is just our standard form terms and conditions and they're not negotiable, they may well be negotiable. Now, in certain instances, for example, in my slide, the types of contracts, I'll turn to that now, there are what is known as adhesion contracts. And adhesion contracts are the kinds of contracts that you see, for example, when you open your iPhone. And there are terms and conditions set out in writing, pages and pages long, that you don't have any ability to negotiate more favorable terms. You purchase the iPhone, those are the terms and conditions under which you purchase the iPhone, and you can't negotiate those terms. So that is a possibility. And sometimes when you purchase something online, right, or you enter into a transportation contract with FedEx or UPS, you are entered into an adhesion contract with standard terms and conditions that you have no ability or little ability to negotiate any of the terms. Whereas all of these other types of contracts, generally, they're negotiable. Let's just highlight, I'm not going to necessarily run into each and every type of contract in detail here, but the more important ones would be the operating agreements and bylaws. Let's start with that. Those are what we call the governance agreements between the owners of a company or a limited liability company. Operating agreements relate to limited liability companies. That's a legal document that sets out the ownership structure and member duties between the members and owners of a limited liability company. And it's very important when you're in a working relationship with another party to have an operating agreement. And under Alaska law, you'll need to have an operating agreement if there's more than one member in the limited liability company. Bylaws are basically it's a legal document that sets out the key rules and regulations for governing the corporation's day-to-day operations. It articulates the different procedures that the board and the officers and directors of the company have to follow in order to ensure that the corporation runs smoothly and efficiently and consistently. So those are really important documents, and they have to be maintained, and they need to comply with the state law. And so it's very important to consult with an attorney about drafting these founding governing documents that you need to have in place in order to ensure the corporation, the companies run smoothly. You guys will most commonly deal with employment agreements. So you may want to hire somebody to assist you with your business. You'll have employees, and it's a traditional document, and it will set out the rights and responsibilities and obligations of both parties during the employment period. It'll set out the salary, the benefits, the work schedule, if the person gets vacation, any restrictions on confidential information, and all of those things. And those will be probably a common contract that you'll be dealing with in your small business as you decide to hire individuals to assist you with the running of the business. Lease agreements, you can have a lease agreement for a piece of property or real estate, a building, or you can even lease equipment. So you likely will be exposed to some type of lease agreement in your period as a small business owner. If you're going to be operating out of a storefront, or you have a retail store, and you're using that in your business. And that document will outline the terms of the lease. So how long is a lease for? What space are you renting? Is it a warehouse? Is it a office? All of those things. You'll look at the rent, who will pay the property taxes, who will maintain the property. All of those elements will come into a lease agreement. Same with a piece of a lease for equipment as well. How long will you have access to that equipment? Who's obligated to maintain the equipment? What happens if the property gets damaged? All of those items will need to be set out in the contract. Insurance agreements are important. That will be something that you will want to discuss with your insurance broker. And essentially, it's an agreement between the insurance company and you as the insured party that allows the risk of some significant loss or burden to be transferred from you as the business owner to the insured, and in exchange, you promise to pay a payment called a premium. So that's an insurance agreement, and we highly recommend that you do that. I'd just like to highlight non-disclosure agreements. So oftentimes a party, in order to determine whether or not they want to do business with you, they may ask you to sign a confidentiality agreement or a non-disclosure agreement in order to present you with information about the business deal that they're considering entering into, to ensure that you do not discuss information that they're providing to you to a non-authorized party. They're common to protect trade secrets or other sensitive financial or business information. Those are contracts that also that you may want to consider having other people sign if you're going to be providing them with highly sensitive information. So those are important contracts for many small business owners, and especially if you have intellectual property that you're protecting or other trade secrets. Siena's already talked about independent contractor agreements. You may be acting as an independent contractor for other companies. You may be providing services to another corporation or entity where you or your business is acting as an independent contractor. So as a service as a service provider or as a consultant. So you'll want to make sure that your independent contractor arrangement, your consulting arrangement, or your service contract sets out all the basic terms that Siena ran through before you contract with another party. Important note on loan agreements and promissory notes. So a loan agreement is essentially a contract that a lender, a bank, would agree to loan you money as a borrower, and then there will be specific obligations that you are required to meet in order to receive that funding. And you may have to provide security for that loan in the form of collateral, and that could be your personal assets, it could be business assets, in order to ensure that you repay the debt. So it's very important to understand what you are promising to a lender when you sign a loan agreement, because you may be obligated to provide a personal guarantee, for example, versus some other sort of business collateral. So you want to be very careful to understand what you're agreeing to under that loan agreement. And a promissory note is essentially, it's a negotiable instrument, which means a bank can actually sell it to another party, but think of it as an IOU. It's a payment on demand. You are required, it's a formal contract that requires you to repay the loan to the lender. And the person who owes the payment is called the payee. So, the person who is owed the payment to, the bank, in other words, or the lender, is called the payee, and the person who is obligated to make the payments is called the payor, or the maker. And so there's some different language and terms used in a promissory note, but they're generally tied to loan agreements, and they can be secured and unsecured in the same way that a loan agreement can. So it's very important that you understand the terms of those types of financial arrangements very carefully. I know that was a lot of information, but just be sure you read your contract very carefully. And I think it's going to help. Now, Siena is going to just quickly run through how to read a simple contract and the basic terms of the contract using an example, an actual example of a real contract, just to kind of guide you through a simple contract and the terms and what you should consider when you read the contract.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jill, and thanks for running through all of those. And I can't emphasize enough, just ask questions. If you don't, if there's terms in the contract or there's things that you don't understand, don't assume that it is boilerplate and it should be fine and it's not a big deal. I would ask the other side, ask an attorney, but just make sure that you really understand everything that's in the agreement. I can think of a lot of situations where clients have come to me and what's written is just was not their understanding, and that ends up being incredibly challenging. Also,
yeah, that's right. And then they're just really important. And I'm kind of skipping ahead here in a sense, but really the importance of contracts is it outlines exactly the scope of the agreement, and it prevents you from having conflicts later, and it mitigates your risk of a conflict later, and it helps to avoid expensive litigation and proceedings. So if we can make sure that the contract is clear and concise, it will give you security and peace of mind later that you are protected and you have a binding and legally enforceable contract. So they're super important.
Absolutely. So just running real quickly through this contract, which is between John Lennon and Paul McCartney, regarding one of their songs. So it's hard to read and it's in this crazy font, but it's instructive, just sort of like the general sort of format of a lot of contracts that you'll see. So you have the title, the date and the party. So this is the preamble. Here, in this preamble, it explains a little bit about, why the parties are entering into this agreement with their publishing company. So these recitals, it explains the context of, why they wanted to enter into this agreement. Then you have the money terms. So this would be, sort of the meat of the agreement, what was being paid in exchange for what. And then down here, you have some representations and warranties. And then in this particular contract, John Lennon and Paul McCartney gave their publisher the right to fight copyright infringement suits and protect the copyrights in the songs. And then it also gives the publisher the right to control the ownership of the copyrights. In the end, you have, the signatures. In Alaska, you don't need to have contracts be notarized. Just a signature is sufficient. So,
Except
this.
for certain, let me just jump in there.
Yeah.
Except for certain transfers of land,
Yes.
and documents that have to be recorded in the recorder's office. There's certain contracts that will have a notarial acknowledgement obligation, and that's set out by statute. But generally speaking, yeah, a regular contract does not need to be notarized, or a contract for services, for example, would not need to be notarized.
So you can have, this sort of formalized contract, which can be many pages, has, very clear headings, sort of identifies what each of the main sections are of the contract. Or you can have a contract like this. So as some of you may be aware, this was deemed by an Anchorage jury to be a contract in 2018. So this is a contract between Alice Raga, who used to own the Anchorage Daily News, right?
Yeah.
And Tony Hopfinger, who was the founder of the Alaska Dispatch. So this agreement is colloquially named as the napkin case. So basically Alice wrote on a napkin, I agree to pay Tony $100,000 at end of each calendar year, beginning 2014 for 10 years. And she signed and dated it. So basically, you know, it's important. Yes, many contracts come, you know, on 8.5 by 11 paper and look very formal, like the John Lennon contract that we saw, but that doesn't have to be the case. So, you know, obviously this went through long and lengthy litigation, which would have been very expensive for Tony, but ultimately he prevailed. So while we do not recommend that you make contracts on cocktail napkins, we just want to raise this because, you know, at least in my experience, particularly at the start of, you know, a small company, there can be agreements made between, you know, sort of like the initial founders of a company, or with friends of theirs, or, you know, understandings that can have long-lasting consequences. So it's just important to be mindful of, you know, what everybody understands is happening at every step of the road. And so the best way that everybody can make sure they're on the same page is to document things as much as possible and have contracts that accurately reflect, you know, everybody's understanding of what's going on in the company. So similarly, so this is a very famous contract by Babe Ruth, giving away his unlimited rights to reproduce and use his likeness for bats. So quick story here, my boyfriend was stationed at Fort Knox this summer in the military. I went to go visit him outside of Louisville. We went into town, and the Louisville Slugger Museum had this very cool display where you could swing, you know, bats that they had made for famous folks. So my boyfriend was swinging Derek Jeter's bats and wanted me to take a photo of that. But I was sidetracked by this agreement. So basically, a lot of the success of the Louisville Slugger franchise and being able to create, you know, sort of their business model to create bats came from this, you know, 4-line agreement that Babe Ruth signed in 1919. So basically, he gave the bat maker unlimited rights to reproduce Babe Ruth's bats in 1918 for $100 and a set of golf clubs. So with that, you know, the company is able to use his likeness and his name
in perpetuity,
become absolutely huge in you know, sort of baseball industry. Yeah, forever. So again, you know, contracts have long consequences, and so it's really just, if you take nothing else away from what we've shared today, just really important that you know, you are careful and thoughtful about the agreements that you're entering into. Jill, do you want to follow up on this?
Yeah, I already ran through the importance of the contract. I mentioned that as Siena was finishing up her thing, so you can reread those protections there. And then these are common issues that come up with contracts. You know, things aren't clear. There's no price protection for a specific item that you're selling. There's confusing terms, like confusing payment terms. There's vagueness on when the item is supposed to be delivered, or schedules. There could be 2 separate contracts that deal with the same topic, and that makes it confusing when there should only be one. Sometimes a small business owner may not have the bargaining power if they're trying to do business with a larger publicly traded company, for example. Termination rights could be set out in the agreement that maybe one party doesn't understand, or there are termination rights, or there aren't termination rights. So those can be very, very challenging subjects. And assignment and change of control provisions, Siena went over that earlier. It's just important to know, can the contract be assigned? Can you change the ownership of your company and still continue to do business, or do you need the consent of another party to assign or change the ownership structure of the company? So those are common issues that we see with contracts, and you may want to consult your attorney to help you. And on that front, so we're here to help. Like, lawyers are here to help you negotiate the terms of the contract, to help you draft it so that the contract is clear. Also to explain the risks associated with specific provisions. For example, those indemnity provisions that are oftentimes very difficult to understand. We can help to ensure, lawyers can help to ensure that you are not, for example, providing a personal guarantee for your business if that's what you did not intend to do. Or if you do that, if you do have to sign a personal guarantee limiting it to a time frame or a certain dollar amount so that you have some protection of your personal assets. We help you identify problems with the contract. And then in the event that after you've signed the contract, there's a problem with it, we can help you with those, what the legal remedies are, and negotiating if there is some sort of breach, how to resolve those contract disputes and negotiate a settlement related to any breach of contract. So lawyers are really around to help you not only draft the contract, but understand the terms of the contract. And then if there's a problem with the relationship between the parties and the contract itself, we can help resolve those disputes as well. So contact your lawyer if you need help with your contracts.
So here are a variety of resources. Please check them out. They're here to help. They provide you with a lot of great information. But like Jill said, if you have any additional questions or items specific to your business itself that you would like a lawyer to speak with you about, Jill and I are absolutely more than happy to speak with you about those issues. So feel free to reach out to us, and assuming there aren't conflicts, we'd be happy to set up a time to speak with you about your company.
Thank you so much, Siena and Jill. That was a fantastic presentation, so informative. I see that we are a bit past 11:30. If anyone has a question that they really want answered, please speak up now. Otherwise, we will be looking at some questions that have been dropped in the chat. Oh yes, so Becky is saying, thank you so much, great information. And I appreciate you for showing up to Alaska Startup Week. Yes, thank you too so much. Yeah, what you guys said about the contracts is so important, especially for small businesses and especially for community-based startups, because so often those are, like they're launched with informal understandings, and then later on there are problems down the road. Yeah, so we have a question from Jody Olien. So she is from Remora, which is an app that allows air carriers and customers to easily coordinate cargo shipments throughout Alaska. Very cool. So she said, we are looking for information on who in Alaska has experience writing legal terms and contracts for an app. We have had a difficult time finding someone with experience with tech law.
Yeah, in Alaska, there are, I would say that there are not as many attorneys locally, that deal with that subject. But I would recommend that she look at a firm the size of Dorsey, right? Like Dorsey has attorneys within its structure that deals with any any type of issue relating to any industry and tech contracts. We've got folks in our office that do that type of work, so she could definitely contact us and we can put her in touch with an attorney at the firm who would be able to provide advice on that front. And I would say that there are, other mid-sized national law firms or larger law firms that have that kind of expertise, and they will be able to provide an Alaska law business with assistance. I would recommend that they look at a law firm with an office in Anchorage, though, right? So that they have not only the tech law expertise, but also the Alaska law experience, because it's important to have both. So she may have to look at a firm like the size of Dorsey that has that type of in-house, that type of expertise within the law firm at the international level, right?
Thank you for that. One of the viewers in Seward asked if there are any benefits to being a woman-owned business or majority-owned. For example, a husband and wife want to start a business together. Is there any reason why it would be better to put it in the name of one person versus a partnership between both? And then the viewer added, I know in the past couple of years, there were specific grants for women/minority-owned businesses. So is that something that people should consider?
Yes, it is. And that is something that you could quickly Google online and women-owned businesses benefits grants, and there will be a lot of information about the different types of benefits to certain women-owned businesses, diverse businesses. The federal government may have grants. There may be other local state grants available that will assist that business. So yes, that is something to consider, and I would recommend that they do more research on that. Unfortunately, we didn't have time to go through something like that today, but that's a great question.
Amazing. All right, does anyone have any other questions? I will drop a link to the feedback survey. It would be great if the attendees could fill that out. I know that we had people pop in and pop out, but if you do have the time, you can be entered in a raffle for a giveaway. And just as a reminder, this is part of the larger Startup Week 2021. We have a lot of events going on, so please check out the calendar. And Siena and Jill, thank you so much. That was an incredible amount of information and so helpful to all of our viewers. And many people have asked me to share the recording or the presentation with them already. So I know they have really appreciated it. Yeah.
No, thank you for inviting us. We really enjoyed participating and appreciate the opportunity, and we're happy to answer questions after the fact as well. So.
Amazing. Could you maybe drop your emails in the chat so people can maybe contact you?
Sure, I'll go ahead and do that. And thank you again, Tiana. And just like to reiterate what Jill said, we're so happy to be part of Alaska Startup Week and excited to see the energy of so many individuals around the state who want to either start or expand their businesses. So really happy to be part of this today.
Yeah,
we're so happy to have you.
and I think, Tiana, the presentation, you'll share the presentations with participants who are interested in having a copy so that they can refer to it later. Great.
Absolutely.
And then our information is, they can contact us by email there or phone the office too. That's fine.
Okay, fantastic. So I will have a link to the recording and to the presentation on the Facebook event. If you are unable to access that, please send an email to me directly. I'm also going to put my email in the chat. Yep. And if there is nothing else, thank you all so much for coming. It has been a pleasure, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.